Have you ever wondered what drives a person to become one of the most infamous criminals in history? Today we tell you the life of Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Butcher. In this video, we will explore his childhood, the events that led him to darkness, and what happened until his last day. Subscribe and activate the bell to not miss more content like this. Let's get started. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, into a family that, at first glance, seemed ordinary. However, his childhood was marked by instability. His parents, Lionel and Joyce Dahmer, had a conflicted relationship, with frequent arguments that deeply affected Jeffrey from an early age. From a young age, Dahmer showed an unusual interest in dead animals, going so far as to collect remains and parts, which alarmed his parents and teachers. Despite these signs, he did not receive adequate care to address these behaviors. Instead of seeking help, his family chose to ignore these signs, allowing Jeffrey to sink deeper into his dark world. Throughout his childhood, Dahmer was shown to be a withdrawn and solitary child. He was often teased by his classmates for his strange behavior, which only increased his isolation. Instead of playing with other children, he spent long hours in the woods near his home, exploring and collecting animal bones. His parents, concerned about his constant fighting and his mother's mental health, did not pay enough attention to their son's disturbing activities. As a teenager, Dahmer retreated further into drinking and solitude. By the age of 14, he was secretly consuming alcohol, and was described by his peers as someone who often smelled of liquor at school. Alcohol became his way of escaping a life he viewed as aimless and purposeless. Despite his intelligence, Dahmer never managed to fit in socially, and his academic performance began to decline. His parents officially divorced when Jeffrey was 18, further exacerbating his sense of abandonment. His mother moved in with his younger brother, leaving Jeffrey alone with his father, who was also absent much of the time due to his job. This was a critical time in his life, as Jeffrey was left without a family support network just when he needed it most. At the age of 18, Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first serious criminal act in 1978, shortly after his parents divorced. At this point, Dahmer began to develop a pattern. He would lure young people under friendly pretenses, then commit unimaginable acts. Over the next few years, his actions only escalated. In 1987, Dahmer carried out an act that defined the rest of his life, when his impulses went completely out of control. From this point on, there was no turning back, and Dahmer dove headlong into his dark desires. In his early adult years, Dahmer moved to Milwaukee and began living alone. During this time, he refined his method and increased the frequency of his acts. His modus operandi became increasingly meticulous and calculated. Dahmer sought out vulnerable people, often from marginalized communities, which allowed him to remain unnoticed for longer periods of time. Dahmer's apartment was soon filled with objects and mementos from his victims, which he considered personal trophies. He even went so far as to conduct experiments in his apartment, showing how much he had lost touch with reality. His public behavior was in stark contrast to his private actions. At work, Dahmer was regarded as a normal, if somewhat reserved, employee. No one suspected the double life he led. Meanwhile, Dahmer perfected his technique, using substances to control his victims, ensuring that they could not resist his desires. This detailed planning allowed him to continue his activities for years without being discovered. On July 22, 1991, a man managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment and reported the case to the police. This was the beginning of the end for Dahmer. When officers arrived at his home, they discovered irrefutable evidence of the crimes he had been committing for years. The evidence was so shocking that even for seasoned police officers, it was a shocking discovery. Dahmer's arrest and subsequent search of his apartment revealed disturbing details of his actions. Not only did he keep personal items belonging to his victims, he had documented some of the proceedings in his apartment. Officers found photographs that Dahmer had taken of his victims in various states, which showed the extent of his obsession and the meticulous planning behind each act. During his trial, Dahmer pleaded guilty, but on the condition that his actions were the result of his mental problems and social isolation. The trial was one of the most publicized of the decade, attracting national attention. Families of the victims came to give their testimonies and confront Dahmer in court, which generated moments of high tension and drama in the courtroom. However, the testimonies and evidence were overwhelming. He was sentenced to several consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole. Dahmer displayed a surprisingly cooperative attitude during his trial, admitting to all of his crimes and showing apparent remorse. However, many questioned the sincerity of his words, considering the extent of his actions. During the hearings, Dahmer explained that he never intended to hurt his victims, but rather sought to keep them close to him in a way that no one else could understand. This statement left many wondering about the complexity of his mind and his true motivations. While in prison, Dahmer displayed behavior that many described as bizarre. Some reports indicate that he began reading the Bible and seeking spiritual redemption, an attempt to find peace in his troubled mind. However, his days in prison were far from peaceful. Dahmer was sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, where he attempted to lead a quieter life. However, due to his notorious fame, he became a target for other inmates. Dahmer was closely monitored by the guards due to the nature of his crimes and the hatred his actions had generated inside and outside the prison. Despite this, Dahmer began working janitorial duties and other assigned jobs around the prison. On November 28, 1994, while performing cleaning duties with other inmates, Dahmer was attacked by a fellow inmate. The attack occurred in a poorly guarded area, raising many questions about security conditions and whether there was any deliberate intent to leave Dahmer vulnerable. The attack proved fatal and Jeffrey Dahmer died at the age of 34. For many, his death was seen as poetic justice, while others considered it to be a tragic end to a life marked by violence and lawlessness. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer remains one of the most disturbing and fascinating in modern criminology. His life raises questions about the nature of evil, the impact of social isolation and the lack of intervention at the first signs of dangerous behavior. Through documentaries, books and series, Dahmer's figure has been analyzed and reinterpreted in many ways, trying to make sense of what seems inexplicable. Despite attempts to understand him, Jeffrey Dahmer remains an enigma to many, a man whose life was marked by a series of tragic and horrific choices. If you found this video interesting and want to keep exploring more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Subscribe for more content about the world's most shocking criminal cases and don't miss any updates. Thanks for watching and as always, stay curious, but safe.